Ben, you know City very well, and I'm sure many people listening know who you are and know what City Demand does. But could you maybe just give us, a kind of an overview of your kind of career, what you do today, and why I guess GMB sort of suspensions and sort of reinstatements is something you know so much about?
Yeah, absolutely. I got started my career back in 1994, actually working with small businesses way back in the day before Google even started. Fast forward in the 2000s, worked a lot in the enterprise hosting, web hosting world, mainly doing SEO, enterprise SEO. Got tired of enterprise SEO. Lots of fun stories back then, though. And ended up basically starting to study demand with my partner in 2013. And long and short of it is that ended up having a customer, which was a gun shop. And Google was basically suspending them and removed them from maps. And I called the Google support, and they said, well, gun shops, guns kill people, so we're no longer going to allow gun shops on Google My Business. And that was it. I did, of course, didn't like this answer, and I went to the forums, and that's when I was helped by actually Joy Hawkins. And that really opened my eyes up to local at that point. And we were getting a lot of local clients, so I wanted to get involved and help other people out, especially when it came to verification and suspensions and just common troubleshooting issues. There was a lot of frustration, and of course the frustration with Google support, which has always been there. It was horrible, and so I wanted to help. And that's how I became a product expert. I think it was like with about 6 months, something like that. And so verification was really where I started when I became a product expert. I started in that area helping people out with verification because of the frustrations there. And that ended up just kind of naturally leading over into suspensions, as well as, of course, spam work, because they're all kind of interconnected in one way or another. The way I look at a suspension is basically the opposite of, in a sense, spam, actually. Because with spam, you're hunting down what somebody is doing wrong, per se, with the guidelines. Whereas with a suspension, you're looking at, well, what are they doing wrong and what do we have to fix, basically. So just polar opposites of each other.
And I guess spam reporting can lead to suspensions. So
spam reporting, leads to a suspension for the person that you're reporting.
Yes,
that's for sure. Yeah. And I get asked the question a lot, actually, and that is like, if I'm reporting spam, can that actually get me suspended? And the answer to that actually is that sometimes, actually. Okay. Not through any kind of fault of your own, but mainly because when, and I mentioned this actually in the article that we just did with you, is that what Google does is when they, for instance, let's say somebody like me or Jason or Joy go out and we go after, or Tom, or go out after hundreds of listings, right? And we do it all in one metro area. Let's just say Orlando, Florida. Google will then take that data, they take it from the redressal form, they take what they learn, and even though everything is being done by humans as far as an evaluation goes at this point, they take what they learn, they feed that into a machine learning model. And what they do is they kind of do what we could be considered like a micro sweep of the area. And they look for patterns, basically, and then they'll go out and they have to do something which is called a Mendel test. And the Mendel test basically states that there should be X amount of false positives, and that meant the test works. Okay? So what can end up happening is you could actually end up getting caught in a sweep, which is these little micro sweeps that occur because of the Mendel test. So I know that wasn't exactly your question, but I figured you might find that interesting.
That did lead on from last week's webinar, which is all about sort of spam fighting. I think what you're saying is that the Google machine basically feeds in sort of manual sort of reportings of spam to tweak its, I guess, detection algorithm, and then sweeps through the data ecosystem and applies some of those new learnings to a wider data set, which means
Correct.
you might get caught up if you happen
Right.
to be in the similar industry and you happen to tick a certain box that's similar to, the changes that have been made based on the manual inputs in the spam page.
Exactly. And there's other types of tweaks too that occur, right? So, like June of last year, right, when we had the seismic number of suspensions that occurred, that was mainly due to the personal injury space, but that was due to a tweak that was made to take an extremely hard look at the PI space because it was being abused so much by basically the fake listing creators. And but that was a massive tweak, right? So that's why we saw a massive number of suspensions. But there's little tweaks like this that just end up happening all the time. Sorry.
We're going to get into so much detail. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. And the tactical, the tactical awareness that we're going to come out of this with, in terms of being able to kind of diagnose for ourselves the problems that a client faces, and then what the steps and paths out of that are going to be amazing. Why don't we go to sort of, kind of 10,000 feet and just get a kind of overview of what causes GMB listings to be suspended? What's the difference between the different types of sort of suspension, the levels of sort of suspension, and then maybe what are the sort of, what's the kind of 101 tactics for, getting a listing unsuspended? And then we can get into some really detailed specifics.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. So where do you want to start to unpack all that? Because that was a couple questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. What causes? What are the main causes of suspensions, and what are the different types of suspensions there?
Okay, so main causes of suspensions. First one I'm going to say is users putting in incorrect data. So for instance, and what I see is a pattern. Is I see that you actually a lot of good actors trying to get reinstated. Now there are a lot of bad actors that are trying to get reinstated as well. But when I'm taking a call from somebody and they're desperate, they all pretty much come with the same story. I've been online for X amount of years. I'm losing X amount of dollars. I have no idea what I've done wrong. Everything's been fine up until today. I'll look at it and sometimes it'll end up being something extremely tiny. Something very small, a data inconsistency here, data inconsistency there, so data integrity, that's one big thing, is you want to have your information correct everywhere. And that includes and I'm not talking about Facebook or Yelp or anything like that. Google doesn't care about that. But what I am talking about is Secretary of State. I am talking about the Better Business Bureau, any other types of, making sure that you do have signage, etc. if you're a storefront. So data inconsistency would be number one, right? Number two, a sweep. There's nothing you can do about it. If you get caught in a sweep, the only thing you can do is go for a reinstatement. The good news is if you have everything ready to go, or if you're just totally legitimate, you'll get reinstated usually, reinstatement times right now are 24 hours. If it's taking more than a week, then you have a very serious problem that you need a second opinion on.
Can I say that for everyone listening? Because obviously there's GMB support is significantly hampered at the moment in terms of its ability to respond to edits and other pieces. But for reinstatements, are you saying that 24 hours is a typical reinstatement time at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been this way actually ever since I'd say about 2 weeks after COVID. Reinstatement times were prioritized.
Right.
So I mean, they Google understood, and we PE is kind of we bitched about this a lot. Was that right now, if anything, there needs to be a lot of attention put on this, because people at this point are suffering across the world. And, getting suspended from Google is already earth-shattering enough to a business. Mm-hmm. So, during a pandemic, it's like this needs to be prioritized. Okay. And it was prioritized. I mean, the GMB team did a fantastic job, and they're still doing a fantastic job. So, but yes, I'm seeing the majority of reinstatements are happening within 24 hours. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag as far as it comes to depending on how you go about your reinstatement. But basically, yeah, at this point, it's like very quick.
Okay. And you said if it's longer than a week, that's a signal for the fact that, either nothing is moving or Google's doing some real deliberation around it. But that generally points to there being a bigger problem.
There's a bigger issue. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It's being routed maybe to individual different members on, say, the reinstatement team, which is called the trust and safety team. So, usually issues like that will come back, like if there's a previous manager issue, or like if you're connected to, say, a piece of software that's causing issues, or you have a history with Google. And I mean, Google's a data company, right? So they keep all of this information. So if you have a history with Google, there's also a possibility that that could also be blocking your reinstatement as well. A history of abuse.
Right. Okay. Okay. So go back to wrong data inconsistency. Can we just be specific? I mean, how small can the issues be? Obviously, there are kind of guidelines around, and everyone understands, I guess, about kind of name consistency, address consistency. Which things don't have to be consistent? Which things do have to be consistent for a suspension not to be triggered?
So it's a hard question to answer because there's a lot of different variables, right? But I've seen something as small as one digit in a US zip code being incorrect in a DBA in the Secretary of State block a reinstatement. Trivial, right? You would think. But that's a data consistency issue. I've seen situations where somebody was using all caps in the word free in their description, and that actually blocked a reinstatement. I've seen issues where people have had, say, a tracking number which is static, like, say, from CallRail on their website. And it's up in the header, it's in the footer. They don't have their actual landline anywhere on the site, but they use their landline in GMB. So there is no, so in other words, they basically didn't put their tracking number as a secondary number inside of Google My Business. So again, in Google's eyes, data inconsistency. But very small thing, and you would never, an average user would never even think, I think, to include a tracking number inside of Google My Business. Why would you? It's your primary. So it's little inane things like that that are interesting to hunt down.
So what are the sort of places? Obviously, you've got GMB, then you're looking for consistency with the website, Secretary of State, BBB. Are there any other kind of sort of must-check sources that Google will look at, to compare the data?
Those are the main. Those are really the main ones. I mean, there are other aspects that they look at. Some things I can talk about, some things I can't. But when I go for a reinstatement, basically for any of my clients, or anybody that we're helping on the GMB community, is I look at every single thing. I have a checklist which is about 12 items long, I should say.
Okay.
That I go through. Can't get into all those details right now, but basically I try to get as many of those as possible. I mean, if you think about it, the way I like to put it is this way, is that when it comes to a suspension, you are guilty until proven innocent. That is just all there is to it. And so from that perspective, you need to provide as much evidence as possible and to Google to prove that you are actually a real entity. And if you think about this, I mean, we can take it back to the spammiest of categories, whether it be lawyers or garage doors, right? And actually completely separate. Anyway, let's look at lawyers. Lawyers will go ahead and they will set up multiple satellite offices. Why? Because it makes sense in their business model to have, they do all their business over phone, right? They rarely go actually to see somebody. So they'll set up virtual offices and they'll say, well, we use it for a conference room. for the most part, they're using it obviously to game the system. But what they're doing is that they're not following the guidelines. They're breaking quite a few guidelines. Okay. And so when they go for a reinstatement, like I work with a lot of them. So when they go for a reinstatement, one of the things I say is, okay, well, do you really need to have a location there? Are you doing this just for SEO purposes? Do you actually meet people? And if the answer comes back as no, actually, we do actually meet people sometimes in this area, it's like, okay, well, move out of that virtual office and go ahead and get, say, cohabitate with another local business, or go actually get a real office space. Sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
That's fun. If we do get back to down to the sort of the reasons for suspension, because we had sort of wrong data, what are the kind of key things that might trigger it to happen?
Another thing, well, going back to the virtual office and the UPS stores, right? So PO boxes, UPS stores, virtual offices, all against the guidelines. And one of the things I see that's kind of interesting is I basically have to call this what's called a reinstatement loop. Basically, what a reinstatement loop is like, for instance, if you are located near a UPS store. This is actually, by the way, fairly recent, within the last, say, 6 months. Okay. But if you just happen to be like near a UPS store, you might actually get suspended, new listing or old listing. And what will end up happening is you go for a reinstatement. You might have all of your ducks in a row, but as soon as you go ahead and basically go for reinstatement, you'll get reinstated and automatically get suspended again. I had one situation where a company actually had a office that was underneath of a UPS store. You had to go downstairs to get to the actual office itself. It was within about 200 feet. And it would just constantly get suspended over and over and over again. I've also seen this happen with virtual offices. So if you have a virtual office, and let's say you have a Regis, and that Regis is one floor above you, then you also can get suspended. So it might seem a little bit extreme, but it's what Google's done to basically combat the spammers.
So they've got a sort of slightly kind of blunt tool then in terms of detecting or knowing the locations of Regis stores and UPS stores, and kind of always kind of blanketing a bit of the area around it. And if your business happens to be located nearby, even in the same building or not the same building, that could be a reason why you're unable to reinstate a listing. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, it's like Jason tossed one over to me the other day. There was somebody on Facebook who was having an issue, and it was a real brick and mortar store, but they just couldn't get reinstated. They were going through that, reinstatement, suspension, reinstate, suspend. Okay. Anyway, after taking a look at it, saw that they had like what was called basically like a UPS store, a mailbox store, like a postal annex. And it was literally right next door. And, but that ended up being the reason basically why they continually got suspended. I mean, it's kind of crappy, but there's no way the merchant's going to know that. But yeah, it's part of, Google
be aware of it. Is there a way to get out of that loop then? Is there a way do you have to kind of sort of cite that as a suspected issue to Google support?
It's really difficult. That usually will take about it'll take about a month to get out of.
Okay.
Unless
you do say, look, this is happening, this is my suspected reason, and that brings it to their attention.
Correct. Right. Because it's going to happen, and you have to make sure that you document every little thing. Right. So, in other words, I went ahead, submitted reinstatement. I was reinstated on this date. Here's my ticket ID for that, or case ID, if you want to call it. Then I got suspended on this. It's all about that documentation. So I keep a documentation sheet for every single suspension that I deal with. And, so that way I just have that data. But it's like, you have, 3 or 4 suspensions in a row, and for a fact you are legitimate, then that could potentially be one of your causes, but just keep documentation. Yeah.
Are there different types of suspension? Is there such thing as a hard suspension and a soft suspension?
Well, yeah. Soft suspensions, hard suspensions. I mean, it's. I think it's actually time to start taking a look at the terminology around those and even maybe rephrase them, because some of the older definitions I think have changed. But the way it's typically looked at is that if you have a hard suspension, you're removed from Google Maps. If you have a soft suspension, your listing is still there, but it just can't be managed. That's really the basics between the two of them. With a soft suspension, at least you're still getting a little bit of business. People can find you, they can call you, you just can't make an update. That's all. You're susceptible because now anybody can go in and suggest an edit and say it doesn't exist or whatever the case may be, right? Yeah. Spam, and then you'll get removed. With a hard suspension, you're gone from Google Maps. You can't, you're out. Google doesn't trust that listing whatsoever. So that's the current way of looking at it is hard, doesn't trust the listing. Soft, doesn't trust the account. However, I see many a times where you have a hard suspension and it's like, say, all of your listings have been wiped out and all have gotten hard suspensions. That's actually more of, it's more of an account issue, but it can also be a listing-wide issue. So a great example of that is I saw this company that was doing breathalyzer tests, they installed breathalyzer units into vehicles. And they thought that it was just fine for them to go ahead and set up locations at, car repair companies all over across the United States. Well, they ended up setting up around 4,000 of these, and they thought they were doing just fine, but everything was very much so against the guidelines. They didn't have any employees there. They didn't have any kind of signage. They didn't have any kind of legal entities in those states. So there were more than enough listings to just get the entire account banned, basically.
And okay, so if you have a hard suspension or a soft suspension, and you're not able to actually edit the details, how do you go about? Before you submit the reinstatement form, the sort of best practice is to go and make edits, correct?
Yeah,
everything is correct,
absolutely.
And then reinstate. But if you haven't got access to the GMB dashboard, how can you start to make or manage that data in the first place?
So number one, I'm not sure what you mean by don't have access to the GMB dashboard.
Well, say for example, if it's a soft suspension and they're not trusting your account, but you want to gain back control, mm-hmm. What's the route forward from you in that scenario?
Just because they don't trust the account doesn't mean you can't get into your account. So they haven't removed they haven't destroyed your account itself.
Yeah.
So you can still get into the GMB dashboard. It's just there's a trust level of that account. And that trust level has gone from, say, 5 to 0.
Okay.
And so you can still get into your account. I mean, there are very extremely rare circumstances where you can't get into your account completely. But those are not GMB related. That's more on the account side issue. So that's a totally different department. Regardless, whether you have a soft suspension or a hard suspension, you'll still be able to get into your Google My Business account. You can still see everything. You can't see your posts. That's the one thing you can't see. So if you were doing a content violation, which also can lead to a suspension, then you won't be able to fix that, basically. But everything else, you're going to be able to fix. Okay. You're even going to be able to see the fact that you have reviews there. You just won't be able to respond to them. So again, no control. So one of the things that I do want to bring up is that document any kind of changes that you're making to your Google My Business listing while it's in a suspended state. It's just a good idea to keeping track of things is very important. However, on the new version or incarnation of the reinstatement form, they've actually removed the box to say, "Tell us what you've changed." That used to be the first box, text box. So they're no longer asking for that clarifying information. So I guess that they've done something where they've actually started to just say, "Okay, well, now we know what's been changed." So I found that kind of interesting.
And when you keep track of that stuff, and you say you keep a detailed audit trail, is that for your own records, or do you ever submit that as part of the process to Google? If you want to kind of show them essentially a history of the problem and what you've done and any kind of correspondence. Is that something you use as evidence?
It's both. It's both. It's a very tactical, situational type of thing. So if I have to, quote unquote, get into an argument with support about a listing, I need all the details at my fingertips. And sometimes it's just as simple as I need to grab a case ID and the date of the last time that I contacted Google and what a brief summary of what that discussion was. Right now, of course, everything is done through email support. And so it's a little bit easier to track as far as that goes. But when you're an agency and you're dealing with, anywhere northward of, say 2-3 suspensions at a time, it can get pretty jumbled very quickly. And if you're a multi-location business, you can get lost really quick.
Okay. Why might, what are the things that trigger suspension due to account? And kind of sort of full hard suspension based on trust around account level. When you're managing multi-locations, I can hear that can sometimes be a problem when you're a manager and you've got one listing that gets flagged. That can have an account-wide impact on you. Is that right?
Yeah, and that happens a lot. Like when people are doing, say, suggest and edit. If you go out and you're doing a lot of suggest and edits, and let's say something silly like you pick 100 storefronts and you mark them all as homes. Or you're going in and you're maliciously, changing every CVS into a Walgreens, as far as name wise, or you're moving pins all over the place. In other words, you're doing something which is very malicious in intent. Then you could have your account get hit. And if your account gets hit severely enough, then your listings can also be susceptible to getting wide, hard or soft suspensions. There's a lot of other variables that go into that. The other thing is it's very common, pay-per-click. So you might have a pay-per-click agency that you work with. They'll sometimes want to put a manager onto your listing, and they will violate a guideline with AdWords, which will basically trigger an account type of suspension, which will spill over into Google My Business. They're extremely hard to detect. I see them probably, I'd say, 3 times out of 50. I'll see something like that. Again, they're very rare, but there's a lot of troubleshooting that goes into figuring out if that's actually the cause of the issue. And then, of course, there's just patterns of pure abuse. So, we go back again to lawyers, right? A lawyer goes ahead, it's a one-man shop, and he goes ahead and has, 13 listings all across, California. That could also cause an account level suspension too, because he's in a bunch of virtual offices. So every single listing just gets completely whacked.
Okay. So let's jump over and look at the kind of question off the top of the list. Great question. What is the best way? What is the process and the steps that you go through to get a GMB listing reinstated? Maybe just walk through relatively quickly the kind of what are the steps 1 to 20 that you take, which you think is a good tried and tested approach that others could follow.
Well, so the first thing I do is like when I'm looking at a listing that's been suspended, first thing I do is I start asking questions. I have a very specific list of questions that I go down just to verify the veracity of the business itself and see if they're in compliance or not. It's like, okay, so where are you located at? Are you at a service? Are you a storefront, or are you running the business out of your home? Service area-based business. Okay, great. Depending on the answer, it's like, okay, great, you're a storefront. Do you have signage? That's where answers start coming back weird, by the way. People will be like, oh, yeah, I've got signage, but we're in the back of the building and we have this little kind of broom closet of an office. It's like, okay, that might need to be dealt with. Or they took over a business or a building and they have signage, but Street View has never been refreshed. And, so it's very difficult to prove, anyway, so lots of different variables. So figure out like, okay, how in compliance is a business already? I can tell you this, that I'd say in the last 3 months, I've probably done maybe 200 reinstatements, something like that. And I can tell you that 99.5% of the time, people are not actually in compliance and they're not ready. They're not even close to being ready to being reinstated. So,
they don't match the guidelines. They basically failed to match up their details to what the guidelines require.
Exactly. So to get back to your question though, so I go through a list of questions and, it's basically just looking at the guidelines and saying, okay, are you registered with the Secretary of State? Of course I look to see if they're registered with the BBB anyway. It's not a part of the guidelines, but it is a trust factor. If they're a service area-based business, do you require a city license? Yes or no? Because sometimes actually the answer is I can't get a city license, anyway. And so basically just go down a checklist of items that I know Google's going to look for and what we need to, again, to show the veracity of that business. And based on that information, then we just start going through a logic tree, basically, of troubleshooting at that point, and sometimes it's not even something like I said, it might be a data integrity issue. So you have to go through and check all those things, ask those questions. And then there's some really interesting stuff happening in chat right now about removing listings from dashboards, which actually, thank you, Jason, for jumping in. Those are important points.
So, there's a scenario. So if you go through and you make the business adjust where it needs to adjust, or you kind of modify it. It's so is there a business that said it was a storefront? You kind of correct that. At what point do you decide to submit the reinstatement request?
Good question. So I have what I would like to consider an 80% rule. So, again, so there's 8 to 12 items that Google will look at when it comes to reinstatement. And so I feel like if I can get to 100%, fantastic. It's almost going to be a guaranteed reinstatement unless there's something going on in the back end that we're not aware of. But if I can get to 80%, I can still be very confident.
Okay.
So that somebody is going to get reinstated. I had a law firm just the other day, and they were moving from a Regis to a home. They didn't know that they couldn't be in a Regis. They thought it was okay, right, to work out of their home and have just a conference room. Anyway, long story short. So we're doing basically what I like to call a reinstate move. Not a complex process, right? And so they are in immigration law. And I said, well, okay, so we need to hide your address, but when it comes to the bar, we need to show your address, and it needs to match. They didn't really want to do that. I said, well, okay, then you're not going to get reinstated. That's just pure and simple. It's not going to happen. I said, you have like a 1% chance, maybe. I said, okay. Then they said, okay, we'll do that. No problem. I said, okay, great. What about a city tax license? Can you get one? This is in LA County. They can get one, but they didn't want to get one because they didn't want to pay taxes in that city. I said, if you don't get a license, you will not get reinstated. Plain and simple. I said, your percentage chance is pretty much the same at this point. I mean, yeah, you got a bar license. So anyway, and I said, also, I said, since you're a service or your business, actually, no, I'm going to skip that one. So anyway, there was another piece too. They're very simple to do, but they didn't want to do it. And I said, fine, we'll go ahead, we'll submit. No problem. I said, but if this fails, we need to do this, this, and this. And so submitted, and 24 hours, got the response out of the guidelines. Told them they're going to go ahead and they're going to get a tax license now, and they're going to get the rest of the items that they need, and then they'll go ahead and they will get reinstated at that point.
And what kind of information does Google feedback at that point when you're getting a rejection? And does it just say it's outside the guidelines, and then you've got to have the knowledge to work out which bits are?
Yes.
Getting better with giving you pointers.
Let's just say pointers spotty at best.
Okay.
And the reasoning for that is very simple, is that the more Google's going to tell you about what you're doing wrong, the more possibility you have of being able to abuse the system.
Sure. I get the rationale.
Right. And that's why it's like when you're talking to a PE, it's like, sometimes we're cagey with answering questions. It's like, we know certain things that spammers, if they knew, could take advantage of and create tons of loopholes in the system. So we have to be a little bit careful with the information that we have. But anyway, but Google, to answer your question really quick, Miles, is that sometimes they will tell you things. Sometimes they will ask you for a lease. Sometimes they will ask you for, a license. Sometimes they will straight up come out and say, there's the most frustrating one, there's activity from a previous manager or owner. And then they'll say, create a new listing, basically. And then, they'll move over your reviews. By the way, never follow that advice. There is always a fix for that. Okay. So
don't create a new listing and then migrate the reviews.
9 times out of 10, don't listen to Google support.
Right. Okay.
I mean, if they're asking for a lease, sure, give them a lease. But if they say create a new listing, run the other way.
Right. Okay.
You need to head to the community or reach out to one of the product experts on Twitter or Facebook, whatever. Head to the help community and say, hey, I've got a suspended listing. Would somebody mind taking a look at it?
Okay.
I will say this: if you come in with AAA junk towing of San Antonio, Texas, we will not help you.
So I guess it's a good point as the next step in the sort of process. So once you've gone through and you've tried to correct things, there is a certain number of times that you should and can sort of do a reinstatement kind of request before Google thinks you're a time waster, or they will no longer kind of consider it.
Yeah, there's no hard fast rule that I'm aware of that I've seen published, or even actually been told about. So, but from the reinstatements, my experience with reinstatements is that you usually want to get it right the first time. Yeah. Like I said, if you get that 1 week period where you haven't heard back from them, then there's a big problem. Because what also end up happening is that because people get so panicked over their listing being suspended, the first thing they do is they hit the reinstatement form and they hit submit. They haven't changed anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so that's one check, right? And then they won't hear anything for maybe a day, and they'll hit contact form, or they'll hit the reinstatement form again, which will come back with maintain one line of communication. The short answer to what you're asking is that yes, you can absolutely be basically a pain in the butt, is what it comes down to. If you inundate them, it creates duplicates. Okay. So, and that's a big problem, basically, because now you've got multiple operators working on the same exact case. So this backlogs the entire system. Sometimes it pushes you to the back. Sometimes you maintain position in line, but also you got to remember these are human beings that are reviewing these requests. This is not automated in whatsoever. So it really just takes somebody maybe not having a cup of coffee in the morning to say, you know what, forget this guy. I'm going to go ahead and put him into this bucket, which is we're just going to ignore you bucket. One other thing I'll say is this, is when you're going through a reinstatement, try to be as brief and succinct as possible. They give you an area to fill in, other information, be as detailed as possible, they say, but don't get emotional. Take a chill pill, relax, stick to the facts, say what you've changed, show your business proof. On the forum right now, it's like you can even upload proof, for instance. But don't go into how this is affecting your family. You can't pay your mortgage. Your daughter can't go to college and all this, because none of that plays into this. It's a very binary decision.
Okay. Yeah. That's really good insight, Ben. Thank you. While you're going through that, you mentioned one line of communication. I take it from that you shouldn't follow up, therefore, on kind of social support with GMB or kind of go to the forum while you've also got a kind of reinstatement request that's active.
Yes, that's pretty much correct. Right. You don't want to go ahead and hit every single channel. When Twitter support opens back up again, of course. But it's just submit and let it go. If you don't hear back in a week, contact. Use the get help form and to ask about the status, and then somebody will get back to you. Another cool thing is now is that Google's also giving you all the details of your reinstatement request when they do email you. This is really important, especially for agencies and multi-locations, because previously it was a black box. You didn't know what was going on, and you would get an email back with a case ID or a ticket number, and would have no idea what listing they were talking about. And I put this in your blog post too, actually, an image of this. It's like you literally email back, what listing is this for? And they give you this canned response. Sorry, what listing is this for? Canned response. They would never tell you. So now they're giving you everything. And, as far as the data goes, and that was something that us PEs fought really hard for about 2 years, actually.
That helps with the audit trail, but it doesn't tell you why a listing was suspended or next steps. But it just means that you don't have to think which one is this related to if you're handling 2 or 3 or multiple at one time.
Right, exactly. And again, Google's not going to really tell you the why. Yeah. There's zero incentive for them to tell you why. And
at what point would you suggest that someone reaches out to a product expert? When should they take that kind of, that next level approach?
My gut reaction to say to that is look, you get suspended, don't hit the reinstatement form right away. You really need to go in and look at the guidelines with a fine-tooth comb. And that thing is huge, by the way. When you start expanding each one of the options, it's a lot to read. And I know, and I've seen too many people where they say, "Oh, I've read all the guidelines." No, you haven't. Why do you have an R in your business name?
Take time, really dig into it as a first port of call. Yeah,
exactly. So,
at which point, when someone is super frustrated, they're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
When and why should they come to a product expert? Or go to the forum.
Denials, pure, straight out denials. So, basically, if you've got a listing and it's just been declined and you have no clue, then yes, bring it over to the PEs. Open up a thread on the forums and just say, look, I've been declined. here's my case ID. This is when I submitted it. Here's all my pertinent information, basically the business name, the address, the URL from the dashboard, any kind of proof, pictures, etc. Links to BBB, links to Secretary of State's, all of that. And also a screenshot of the info tab in your dashboard, because that's actually what we really need to see. There's a lot in there that can cause basically or block a suspension. But yeah, come and get we can't escalate you at this point, really, unless it's like something that we can figure out that's a really that only we can fix, basically. But for the most part, yeah, just come in and just don't expect us to be able to escalate it for you. We can't do that. We can look at it for you.
And you can feedback and give pointers and go like, this is where we think it is. So that's your role.
Yeah.
If you were to escalate it, by the way, what would you, and you felt you had a really valid reason and it's something Google should solve, what would you expect Google's response timeline to be? What would you hope it would be?
Well, again, the escalation path is right now it's broken, or not broken, it's on hold. But in the past, when we were able to escalate it, I mean, we were able to get responses back usually within 2 days to a week. Okay. So that's not something I'm encouraging right now, because we can't escalate actually right now.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it'll come back and they'll tell us at least what's going on with it. Sometimes we can say what's happening, well, sometimes we can't. The reason I'm suggesting the PE, coming to a PE or anywhere, is that very simply is something like this. It's like I saw somebody in the community the other day, was helping them out, and everything looked great. It was a brick and mortar, no problem, shouldn't have been suspended. However, they had their hours set for 24 hours. And it's like a little tiny thing, right? But those are meant for service area businesses, 24 hours. So that was basically what ended up being what was blocking their suspension. And I told them, I said, look, just go ahead. Everything else looks great. You're doing fine. I said, change your hours to when you're actually there and resubmit for reinstatement. The person came back and argued with me, like, but we have a 24-hour service. I said, well, trust me, just make the change and you'll get reinstated.
Okay.
They got reinstated.
Good news. Right, let's jump over. That was a long answer to an excellent question. Let's rattle through a whole bunch of questions here.
Do it.
And I find this whole topic fascinating because it is so kind of thorny and hard to kind of really kind of understand. You've got such kind of great sort of insights into it. Question here from Chris. What's the best way to fix duplicate listings? The question goes on, by the way. It says specifically, what do you do in a situation when you've lost your GMB listing in search due to a duplicate was just added? The listing is still active, but not visible in search like it was before the duplicate appeared.
That one is I'd have to take a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit more it's complex. I mean, it's basically a situation where I was kind of dealing with one of these the other day, where you have the listing in your dashboard, it's been suspended as a duplicate, and then somebody else basically has created another listing, and that one's actually showing up on search. The only thing that you can do is try to it's too complicated to get into this. Okay. I'd have to take a look at it. Open up a ticket in the community.
Okay, so
reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll help you out with it.
Okay, brilliant. I can see your GMB cogs whirring there, Ben, as you were sort of mapping out that process. Like, okay, fine, but yes, it looks like you've got a decision tree to kind of go down with that one. So it's not a
it takes that one. That one's complex. It takes a lot of troubleshooting.
Okay, this question comes in from Stephen. It says, I manage a GMB page for a client, and Google won't accept the photos I've uploaded, even though the photos meet the specifications required. I've reached a dead end with the support and still can't upload the photos. Any ideas what will be causing that?
Still can't upload the photos. That's an interesting one. I would say try a different browser, try to clear your cache. That might be the issue. Unless he's talking about the processing of images, which is a different type of bug.
He says he can go on other ones. Other clients, fine. This just says one specific client that is not accepting any of his photos.
Oh yeah, then I would just go ahead and reach out to support and ask them to reprocess the images.
And would you provide them support? Do you attach them and go, here the images?
Nah, I just ask them to reprocess the images. It just sounds like that's actually a bug, probably just that one simple account.
Okay,
single
so
account.
a technical bug rather than some sort of suspected suspension or problem.
Yeah, no, it has, the processing of images has zero to do with suspension.
Okay, great. Hope that's helpful, Stephen. Okay, this comes from Leanne. It says she says thank you in the first place, which is always nice. Question: will unauthorized edits from public users cause suspensions?
Absolutely. Oh yes, most definitely. It depends. Jason, I know you love that. It depends. But anyway, it depends on the category. So if it's in a sensitive category, PI, locksmith, garage door, whatever, duress category, then the change of the name, if the change sticks, can cause a suspension. That's a very important factor, by the way, is that it's so basically if somebody suggests an edit to the name change, you get the orange strike through in your dashboard and you don't do anything about it. A couple weeks goes by, Google accepts that change, you can get suspended. Somebody does a category change on you, you can get suspended. Somebody moves your map marker, you can get suspended. Somebody goes ahead and changes your URL successfully to something, say, that goes to a malware site, or something of that nature, you can get suspended. That's usually going to be pretty much it.
So again,
it's your core attributes.
The answer is vigilance on your account, on your listing, and responding to the alerts that you get.
Yes, and also I want to put out a warning, and that is this: is that you need to watch out for the software that's connected to your Google My Business listing. Okay, especially if you are in a sensitive category.
Can you clarify what you mean by software connected to your listing?
Sure. So something like, I love all you guys. Moz Local, Yext. Yeah, I mean, Yext is a big one, actually. Anything that basically tries to be the true source of information, right? And basically will push updates back to Google My Business based on what you've entered in the dashboard, can sometimes push information. The user might forget that they're connected to, say, a Yext, right? And I see this happen all the time. They'll forget that they're connected. They'll go in, they'll change the name of their business, or they'll change hours, or change URLs, or whatever. And then it'll get changed back. Well, they'll change it again. They'll get changed back, and they'll change it again. This can and will cause suspensions. I usually suggest that people don't use software as the one true source of information for citations. That they manage GMB kind of separately, and then use the software for the citations that go everywhere else.
Okay.
So just because of that one simple factor, I've seen it happen too many times. I guess that's really it, and those are also difficult to kind of debug too.
Okay.
So
brilliant. Thank you, Ben, and good word of warning there. Thanks for that. The next question comes from Justin. What are the best practices for service area businesses? I guess they're service area businesses to avoid suspension. And what are the most common things that you see SABs doing that trigger suspensions?
Well, showing their address, number one. That's the first thing. Fake listings, obviously, they're going to get suspended regardless. And the other common thing is that SABs, since ranking does depend on the verification address, not your actual service area that you've put into Google My Business, they feel that like a garage door company, for instance. I service this zip code in this city, and this zip code in this county, and this whatever, all over the state or city. And they'll set up multiple SABs because they want to rank. More than likely, as soon as you do that, you are a big target at that point for being redressed. and also for just Google catching you up again in a sweep.
Okay.
So those are the most common.
Yeah. Does the great question kind of gets back to the sweep actually. So if a suspension just sort of comes out of the blue, do you typically think it's someone reporting you, or is it a Google sweep? What's the usual way that these things occur for a business? What's the usual kind of thing that triggers the suspension to happen? Is it a manual action or an automated sweep, in your opinion?
Yeah. So if you're in the guidelines or you meet a certain core pieces of the guidelines, right? That, so if you meet some of these certain core pieces like Secretary of State, for instance, and your website's great and everything is like that, more than likely, that is going to be a result of a sweep. If you're keyword stuffing, you're at a virtual office, you're showing your address, it's pretty obvious, then you've been targeted and you've been redressed at that point. So it's almost binary.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Jason, I hope that answered your questions. Next question is from Tricia, who actually has been very active in the chat. I hope, Tricia, you've had lots of your kind of questions answered by Jason and other attendees. Tricia's question is, what if you have a home address and you hide it in GMB, but SOS has a UPS store address because you don't want to have your home address public?
You're a target.
For data.
I'm going to redress you. Period. Yeah. You're going to get redressed. And then it's pretty much up to Google at that point. And more than likely, they will suspend you.
Okay. And then what would the remedy be?
The remedy is to change, the chances of you even knowing that was the problem is going to be very slim because most people don't even think about it. But the remedy would be to update the Secretary of State.
Yeah. Okay. So it matches. So it's aligned. So you kind of, I guess it was a lesser of two evils. If you don't mind having your home address with the Secretary of State, then change it to that, and then resubmit the reinstatement form.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, having your address on the Secretary of State is it's not that big of a deal, right? I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but if you're a carpet cleaning company and you're using your home as your verification address, and you put that on the Secretary of State, do you think a consumer is really going to check the Secretary of State and come and visit you at your home? Probably not.
No, probably not. They probably have better things to be doing. Okay, let's go on. And I think we've answered Radina's a few questions. Thanks, Radina. She's got a question. Is there a reason why some of the edits in GMB stay pending for a week or more? What is the usual time frame for edits to be accepted or rejected?
Okay, so right now, I mean, pendings actually right now, edits are going through pretty fast. So, it's just usually anywhere from 45 seconds to 3 days. And so if it hasn't cleared, unless it's a short name, if it's a short name, probably not going to happen. But if it takes more than 3 days, just reach out to support.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So 3 days, you think, what, this needs to be bumped up in some place, in some other fashion. Okay.
Exactly. Unless you're in personal injury. Forget about it.
Okay. Hopefully, really that answers your question. So you had a follow-on question which Ben inadvertently answered as well, which is excellent. Why are some listings not visible in Google Maps for weeks after initial verification, and what can I do about this?
Okay, so that sounds like somebody who's gotten stuck in a pending status. So if you've verified and you're not showing up on Google Maps, click on your info tab. And on the info tab, if it says pending, that basically means you are under human moderation for verification. Now, pending status will sometimes automatically, through the automated mechanism, depending on category, we'll go ahead and clear up some within a couple days, sometimes a week. If it's in human moderation, it can take a little bit longer. So that could take up 2 to 3 weeks sometimes. Or you could just get stuck in pending purgatory, like a lot of people do, where they get stuck and it'll be like months my rule of thumb is that if it's taking longer than 2 to 3 weeks maximum, there's actually something wrong with your listing. You're violating the guidelines in some way or another. Most of the time, if I see somebody stuck in pending that long, they're using a PO box. They're using a virtual office. They're using an employee's home, something like that. They're actually usually in violation of the guidelines.
And what action would you recommend? Do they correct those?
Yeah, because it's basically the same thing as a reinstatement, except you're just not going through the reinstatement form. Okay. So you would have to correct it, and then you would basically have to submit the contact form.
Okay, so you correct it, and then you get the kind of contact form. You don't go through the reinstatement form. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. That's brilliant. I hope that answers your questions, Regina. This question comes from Thomas. I had a listing that was suspended. Got suspended, but Google did it wrong. He put wrong in kind of quote marks. No info showing on home or info tab. Other tabs clicked show error message. Tried to get hold of the Google team. They responded back that it was a technical issue, but now I can't get hold of anybody and I'll have them return any follow-up emails. That was 6 weeks ago.
Head to the PE community.
Okay.
Head to the help community. Come armed with your case ID, again, all of your pertinent information, your licensing, etc. And that's something that, ping me. Once you open up the community, once you open up the thread on the community, just hit me up on Twitter or send me an email, and I'll go ahead and that's something that needs to be escalated.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. We've still got more questions coming in. Are you happy to hold on, Ben? Have you? Yeah, we've been on sort of 10, 15 minutes. Seems like people are holding on. We're getting into some really good detail here, and we've just had 3 new questions asked. So let's rattle on through them. Another question coming in from Thomas. Oh, hang on. He says there's a mass suspension event in the last few months where people accidentally suspended a whole bunch of businesses. That sounds like a sweep. You mentioned
Say the question again.
There is no question mark. It says there was a mass suspension event in the last few months where Google accidentally suspended a whole bunch of businesses that should not have.
Okay. I think that might be referencing the agency sweep. Possibly. That was pre-COVID, actually, is what it was. Yeah. So
if you got caught up in that, then presumably you just kind of go through the reinstatement steps that we've talked about, and that should, unless you're not violating.
Yeah. Usually, when it comes to agency issues like that was a different type of bug. So that was actually more of a bug than a sweep, I think. Well, anyway. Regardless, yes, you go through the reinstatement form. There's actually a agency form for contact that you can go through. By the way, I don't know if your people are aware of that, but there is an agency contact form, which is pretty helpful if you have issues like where your agency account has just been shut completely down. But yeah, no, I mean, other than that, I haven't seen any other big sweeps in the past couple months.
What is
unusual, at least
with the agency one? I haven't heard of that. Presumably that's accessible through your dashboard again.
No, actually, it's not. And a second here.
You can probably find the link and look at that. I know Jason was obviously heavily copying up on chat, being brilliant. So rather than scratch you down, we'll go and sort of find that out. And what differences does that agency route have to the usual sort of contact route?
I'm looking for this agency form real quick here. Hold on, give me about 2 seconds.
Okay.
And by the way, this is specifically for agencies. So if you are not an agency, do not use this form.
Would it just fall on deaf ears if you do? Will they just not consider it?
Or worse.
Does it get picked up by a different support team?
Yeah, in a sense it does. It's for people who are agencies. So very, very, very specifically. So I'm sorry. What was I was finding that? What was your last question?
Well, we were talking about lots was about sort of mass suspensions we talked about, but I was going to go to the next question actually, which comes from Liliane. It says, what about having multiple GMB listings and having separate tracking numbers on the listings, but not all of those numbers on the website? Will this block too? We're trying to figure out what exactly that question is about. What about having, if you have your multiple GMB listings with separate tracking numbers on the listings? Again, it's not clear what, I guess from Liliane, whether the GMB listings are all for the same business or they're generally for different locations. What's your kind of rule of thumb in terms of the use of tracking numbers, Ben, so that you don't fall foul of the guidelines?
Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to the tracking numbers, I mean, people have dynamic tracking numbers. So when you have dynamic tracking numbers, it's very difficult. You can't stuff them all into Google My Business. You just can't do that. So what I'd like to say is that when you put your regular number on your contact page or your about page, have it somewhere basically on your website. I mean, Google knows, the techs know to basically go and look at the about page and the contact page.
Okay. And in GMB, do you put that number as your secondary number, but your tracking number is your first number?
Yes.
That's your
correct.
And it's up to 3 numbers you can have, isn't it, in GMB?
I think it's 5.
It's 5. Okay.
I believe so. Yeah. I haven't checked them recently, but yeah, I think it's 5.
And then what number do you put with the fixture and BBB? Because let's say for BBB you wanted to have a separate tracking number on that. Might that trip you up?
Not really.
No?
Not in my experience, because I mean I've done quite a few reinstatements where the tracking number on BBB is different, and the reinstatement went through just fine. Right,
fine, okay. But having something on Secretary of State, obviously you want to have your official number on the Secretary of State.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Secretary, I can't stress the importance of Secretary of State.
Okay. Vicky has asked for clarification about why would being near a UPS store cause suspension. Maybe you could just give a run through of that particular.
It's actually a really quick answer, and that is that UPS stores have been abused for years by spammers, and they've gone ahead and just created tons of listings basically at UPS stores. So in order, I mean, this is my hypothesis, is that Google's been going after, obviously trying to go after and address the issue with virtual offices and UPS stores for a very long time, and all of us PEs. I mean, it's like I can't even tell you how many times that we've said this needs to be addressed, and it's a big problem, and it's taken them a long time just to get to where they are today. Kudos to the GMB team for getting to where they are today. But the basics of the answer, the short answer is that because of the proximity to the UPS store, you may be verified at that UPS store. It also kind of ties into some spamming techniques that when they're creating these fake listings that they use, which I can't get into, yeah. But it kind of defeats them. It defeats those techniques.
UPS stores are like black holes for GMB. You can kind of get inadvertently sucked into it if you happen to be close to them.
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly. Yeah, just avoid
it. Yeah. Okay, so question for Gregory. I had a listing suspended after a location group was removed. Maybe you could explain that a little bit. And would Google be able to retrieve reviews for that listing?
So as long as you have documented the dashboard URL of the listing previous to a suspension, you can always get the review. Well, not always. You can get the reviews. You have a high chance of getting the reviews back.
Okay.
If it's one thing everybody can take away from this webinar is document your data, document your place ID, document your CID, document your dashboard URL. If you don't have these things, then Google's chance of locating data is very, very small. Um, Small story. Dealing with one right now where a rogue employee went in and removed the information from a dashboard. They actually removed the listing from the dashboard completely. And so when this happens, you normally, of course, you lose everything. Luckily, they had their place ID backed up from the write a review link, and they actually had their CID, which amazingly, they had their CID. We weren't able to restore the entire listing, but we were able to at least get the reviews back. As far as the location group aspect of the question, that I'm not too sure about.
Okay. A quick plug for one of our tools. We have actually a Google ID generator tool, which actually helps you identify your listings and spits out all the different IDs that you need. So I'll get Jamie up there to drop that in the chat. Next question, we have a question from Sue. I think she's saying, once the listing was reinstated, we still can't view or edit the listing info. We get into our dashboard, no problem, but the listing itself is blank. How do we get beyond that?
That sounds like a previous question. Again, you need to come to the support. Basically, you need to reach out to support, get a case ID, and then you can come to the support community, basically, and go ahead and escalate that. What really helps, by the way, when doing that is to just do a quick Loom video. Okay. By the way, so just do a Loom video. So Loom's free, and just do a video of the issue that you're having. Because again, sometimes it might be as simple as clearing your cache or using a different browser. But otherwise, it might be just some kind of a technical issue that needs to be fixed.
A technical issue rather than any sort of suspension that's always to worry about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay, got a question here from Aspen. I recently verified my GMB location with one address, but proceeded to change address a week or so later and is now suspended. Did I violate Google's rules? And if so, how can I remedy this?
So they went ahead and they went to verify it and then they changed the address? Did they change the address after they verified it?
Yes, it says, I recently verified my GMB location with one address. Sounds like they achieved that, but then proceeded to change the address a week later and now been suspended.
Okay, yeah. So that's just a frequency change. So basically you just go ahead and, if you verified at one address and then you've changed the address immediately, there's obviously that's going to send up a red flag. It's like, well, why are you changing addresses? What happened? By the way, this happens a lot when you go from a service area-based business to a brick and mortar. If you do that to a storefront, you can get a suspension very quickly that way. Because again, it's like, well, why are you doing this? You were a service area business before. So in that case, you're doing basically what's called a reinstatement move. Okay, that's what I call it at least. And which, again, you're documenting your information. You're saying my old address was this, my new address is this. Here's all my updated information. My Secretary of State's been updated, BBB, blah, 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 all that proof, right? And then submit for reinstatement.
Okay, so just kind of go through kind of steps as a normal suspension.
Yeah, and you'll have to do a re-verification, of course, usually, depending on distance.
Yeah. Is it always the case when you go from being an SAB and let's say you decide to suddenly open up a shop or something and there's a legitimate reason for it? Should you always expect a suspension when you were previously an SAB and you go to storefront?
Not all the time. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say 80% of the time.
Right. Okay. So it's fairly significant. It's something you should expect and just plan for in your kind of timeline. That's something.
Yeah. I'll just say this. Is that we actually have a service. We call it my business assurance. And what I do with that service is we go ahead and we basically will take a company or a GMB listing and we will audit them for the guidelines, basically. Okay. So, and if anything is out of the guidelines, then we go ahead and basically what we're doing is we're preparing a business for suspension is what we're doing. Because like I said, 9.9% of the people that I talk to are not prepared for a suspension ever. So, so that's why we created this service. So we go ahead, we do a full audit on the guidelines and make sure that they are, if indeed they do get suspended, then that they can get reinstated very quickly.
That's a kind of preemptive move then. So insurance should it happen in future, you know that actually when you do the reinstatement request, you've got everything as it should be and document.
Yep. Exactly. There's a link, Thomas, on steadydemand.com for the My Business Assurance package that we have.
I'm sure Jamie will kind of go and grab that. So brilliant. Okay, let's have a couple final questions. This one comes from I'm just. That's a long question.
Go for
it. This is a one. This one from Bernhard. What does Google officially call the 3-pack?
Oh yeah, I remember that question.
Do they, when you talk to the people internally, what do they call it?
A feature. 3-pack, snack pack. I mean, these are all terminology that we have created as an industry, basically. So yeah, 3-pack, snack pack, local results. Whatever. Yeah. Google, it's a feature.
So therefore, Bernard, you can basically whatever you think is easiest and nicest. You go ahead and name what you like. I think we all understand it now. I think we've all been here and read enough articles, had enough conversations to understand the different permutations and sort of synonyms. Okay. Here's a question from Jerry. A client's business listing has become unverified 3 times in the last 6 months. We've not modified the business information, and we use a citation management platform to suppress edits and duplicate listings.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why this is happening?
First of all, disconnect from your service. That's number 1. Number 2, check your address. Usually, so when I see something like that happening, it usually ends up falling into those 2 buckets. Either your address is too close to a virtual office or a PO box, or it's in a virtual office or a PO box, or it's at a home showing its address, or you're connected to a piece of software which is automatically pushing updates. But
would that be unverified as well as suspended?
I'm not sure if the original person who's asking the question, if they mean unverified. I think what they mean sounds like a soft suspension to me.
Okay.
Because there really is nothing else that would cause it to go into unverification status.
Okay, but you think maybe the way of diagnosing it, if you were to disconnect the sort of suppression aspect of the platform you're using, or the platform entirely from GMB, and maybe run with it in that state for a while, and just see if that cures the problem. That would be a thing that you definitely recommend they do.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if in some weird circumstances something is causing the listing to actually get unverified multiple times, I mean, I just haven't heard that very often. So I would say just reach out to me, and I can take a look at it.
Okay. Question from Olga, and we are really cracking on here, but the audience numbers are not dropping off, so it sounds like people are enjoying what we're talking about.
Go for it. I've got extra time set up for this. So
one new person just joined, so hopefully they're getting some good value. This comes from Olga. Hi, I'm trying to verify my listing during this month. They've suspended my listing, and they're not letting me verify it. I can't even enter the PIN code. I've already sent 2 requests and I've got no answers. Any ideas?
I need to know category.
Okay.
And when it's saying can't enter PIN code, that usually is either getting stuck in the verify loop, which means that you click on verify and it says you've run out of options to verify, which is unfortunately a pretty common problem these days I've seen. Or you have tried to verify and you've changed information inside of GMB before the postcard actually got to you. So
Okay.
when you do a verification, you usually don't want to change anything while you're waiting for a postcard, because otherwise you have to get another postcard usually.
And if she's not getting any kind of response, feedback, and no change, I mean, should she just start again with a new kind of fresh listing, or just
if it's a new listing, you can try it again, maybe try it in a different account, but I wouldn't make too many attempts.
Okay.
So because then you can actually get branded at that point. So at that point, really what you need to do is head to the product expert community, help the support community, and again, detail out your issues.
Fine. Okay, so Olga, I guess maybe jump over to the Peace community and have them help. Okay, let's pick up one last question, which comes from Trevor. My client is a serial entrepreneur. He has 4 businesses with unique local numbers in the same address. Some of the services overlap, but they serve unique markets. Doesn't give details of it, but I think we can get a sense of the sort of shape of the different businesses. We've had multiple suspensions for the different businesses. Is there any solution other than getting unique office suites?
Yeah, and multiple addresses, multiple listings at the same address is a very tenacious type of situation. So, because what Google wants to see is, especially if it's a home. Did he clarify that? Is it a home?
Say whether it's a home, no.
Okay. Usually is. So, and especially if they're talking surface area based businesses. So it's a very spammy signal to have multiple businesses at one location. So, because, for that, I would just, to answer the question quickly, yes, I would go ahead and I would look at getting actual office suites or something like that.
So essentially, to break them out, the more uniquely identifiable businesses running at different units, different phone numbers, different addresses, so that you're basically, and presumably if there's crossover in the categories, that actually will be a problem as well. They're all essentially in the same building number.
Well, yeah, crossovers in categories is going to be more like a filtering type of issue than anything else. Really what we're talking about here is we're talking more about the likelihood that it is spam. Yeah. It's just that, it's just not normal. Of course it's normal to be a serial entrepreneur, but it's just not normal to have so many listings stacked in one address, And, if it's home, it's like you can't really put suite number, right? Because there is no suites. They've got bedrooms. You've got one office. The other thing is that what I see when people are doing that is they won't have legal entities for every single one of their businesses. That's another issue too.
Yeah.
So, it can be done, but 4, I stick to 2. Okay.
I lied. I've got one more question. This is a really, really good question. It's come in from Laura, and then I will let Ben, because he's done a fantastic job. This basically is around essentially where someone who's managing multi-location businesses, a whole bunch of them got caught up in one of the sweeps that you kind of talked about. Is there anything they can do to do reinstatements for multiple businesses and multiple listings affected at one time, rather than going one by one and creating a different case ID for each one? She says hundreds of them got caught up potentially.
Oh, hundreds got caught up?
Or she says 100 plus. She says, I manage medical group listings, 100 plus one organization, and they got suspended in one of those sweeps. It sounds like all of them kind of got caught up. Do I have to submit a reinstatement request for each listing?
Yeah. So whenever I hear somebody say hundreds of listings got shut down or suspended, it immediately makes me suspect. That, like I was telling you about with that story with the DUI installers, they said, oh, we had thousands of listings suspended. Okay. Well, all right. Now I have seen places where like storefronts, hundreds of storefronts got suspended. Right. And that was a sweep. If that is the scenario, to answer the question, then what I would do is I would go for a reinstatement on one location first. Just put that in. If you do it today, you should get a response by tomorrow. And that basically, if they do reinstate that one location, build a spreadsheet with all of your information that has your name, address, phone number, and as it is in Google My Business, just go into GMB and download the data basically from the dashboard, export to a CSV. Anyway, do that, come to the PE community and tell us the story basically. Here it is. This is basically we need dashboard URLs, of course, all of that. And just basically say, I was able to successfully get one reinstated, and then here's a sheet basically of all of them. Now, right now, we're going to tell you, go to support and ask basically for, say, to do it that way. Normally we could escalate that, but I would say, actually go to the help community and just go ahead and submit it after you get one reinstated.
Interesting. So prove the case with one. Make sure that all the other listings are similar until they all kind of comply the same as that one did. Then come to you, but also go at this point in time, you can't escalate it because essentially GMB support is on, kind of sort of skeleton staffing. So therefore, go direct through the other support route.
Yeah. One thing I will say is this, though, is that when somebody has hundreds of listings, it's like either A, you're an agency and you're dealing with multiple clients, or B, it's a chain. And if you have hundreds of listings, I would question why it's not in a bulk account. Unless they're all surface area business, that makes sense. So there's a couple other things to think about and look at too.
Okay. Brilliant. We're going to leave it there. A whole 90 minutes flew by. Absolutely fascinating.